Okay, thank you very much, both Adam Dronowski, Stephan Peters, and Wim Verbeke for their excellent presentation. We have now the possibility for to
Oh,
Stephan, maybe Stephan also address some of the questions related.
I'm sorry, but I do not understand. Is there a network connection problem?
You don't hear me,
Now I do. Now I do.
and Wim Verbeke, you're still on mute. Maybe start with a very technical question that was asked by Janet. Does the carbon footprint include transport cost? So locally grown would have footprint. That, that you put all the because then the throw of product.
Okay, well, Wim, I do not know if I'm the only one, but I think there are some connection problems in the chat. But as far as I understood, is that the question that was asked was about the application of the LCA data to different circumstances in different countries, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Well, to be specific, of course, the calculations we carried out apply to the Dutch situation, and of course, nutrient contents are similar between different countries. LCA data, of course, are locally specific. So the LCA data that we have used are Dutch LCA data, and you can imagine that a locally produced apple or pear in the Netherlands have got a low LCA footprint, but when we export them and fly them to Brazil, and in Brazil exactly the same apple or pear will have a high CO2 footprint. So these LCAs are locally specific. And I saw another question in the chat about the LCA data for meat and different kind of meats. Well, we have combined all meats together in one food group. We can also split them up because, as I said, eat less animal, more plant-based is too general. But maybe to put all meat products together is also too general, because you know that the LCA data, or for example, beef, dedicated produced beef has got a higher footprint than chicken meat, for example. So we put them all together in one group. And when it comes to the LCA data for beef in the Netherlands, so the high quality beef, in the Netherlands has got a relatively high CO2 footprint, because a lot of that high quality beef is imported beef from South America and from Ireland. So in the Netherlands, that would have a really high carbon footprint. While we, on the other hand, have a lot of cows in the Netherlands, and the red meat from the cows that come into the market or on the plate of the consumers, of course, have a lower carbon footprint, because our cows eat grass, for example. And those animals that are fed with power feed in Brazil, for example, they are fed with power feed to get those high quality beefsteaks. So the LCA data are country specific. So the LCA data in the Netherlands for exactly the same products will be different for the LCA data in China or in Australia.
Yeah. Okay. That makes it quite complex. My question also to Wim Verbeke: can we ever educate the consumer all the different related to completely impossible to know what is going on? Wim, you heard my question. Looks like that. I can't understand Wim. we don't understand you. Although you are not good, but something wrong. Okay? Now maybe when we can ask Stephan second, there was a about can you use this optional software program also for uh, this application?
I see there are a lot of problems with sound, so hopefully people can understand me.
Go ahead.
Okay, I see that my audio can be heard clearly, so I do not want to steal the show, Chair and Wim Verbeke, because you are hardly audible. I understand from the question that you asked, Professor Saris, and please note if I'm correctly, whether the optimal application would also be applicable for nitrogen or other ecological parameters. Of course, it's just a model, so you can put into the model any kind of input and output. Also nitrogen, but the data have to be available, of course. And I think there is a difference when it comes to application with CO2 footprints or land use or water use when you compare it to the nitrogen discussions in the different European countries. Because as I've already answered an earlier question, that the LCA data and the CO2 footprints are locally specific. So for different countries, you have different LCA data. And when it comes to nitrogen and nitrogen emissions, it's even more complicated because the nitrogen emissions and the effects of nitrogen emissions are even more locally. So in the Netherlands, when you have a farm near a forest or a nature area, then the application of the interpretation of the nitrogen emission data will have another effect than when you are in the surroundings of cities. So the applications of nitrogen emissions in these kind of models, I think, are way too complex to not to get the figures, but to interpret into the specific local situations.
Yeah, I understand that. Another question, more technical question is the insect included in the meat category?
The question is whether insects are included in this database. No. And why is that? Although we do have nutrient content database of, I think, tens of thousands different products, the LCA data available, LCA data availability is we only have LCA data for 210 products. And and I think that's also an issue with LCA data and the application of LCA data, is that we can only calculate with the figures that we have. And we only have figures for 210 products when it comes to LCA data. And that's really important to realize, because we will hear a lot about that we have to decrease certain kind of foods to decrease the environmental footprints of our diet. On the other hand, we should be aware that we do have LCA data of mostly staple foods, so the basic food groups, and because these are simple foods, of which we do have, of bigger industries, of we do have a good view of the whole production chain. And we can calculate easily the LCA data, so the CO2 footprint. For more complex products and confectionery products, these data are simply not available. And that's why I think the one also other paradigm, the wrong paradigm, is that we should decrease basic food groups from our diets. We have LCA data for them, and we know that on some basic food groups, the animal-based food groups have a relatively high carbon footprint, but we do not have a good view of mixed meals that are marketed as such. And all confectionery problems. We do know, by the way, to be a party killer for a lot of you, that soft drinks and alcoholic drinks have got a relative high carbon footprint. So we also have to decrease those from our diets. But those are the only products, as far as I know, except for some candies, that are not basic food groups. So we have a limited amount of LCA data, and that means that we have to be very careful with the results that I've shown you, but also the results that NGOs and policymakers are showing and interpreting.
Why is it such a low number of products LCA data? Amazing. Just in this field of years, so that must be available. Oh.
There were some problems again with your sound, Wim. But the question is, why are there so little LCA data available? Right? Yes, I think that's there are a lot of different products, and there are only a few large companies. A large companies, they do have money to invest and to investigate the LCA data of their products. As I said, most LCA data are applied to basic food groups. So these are carried out by farmers, and of which we do have the whole food production chain inside. So those are the products that do have LCA data of. As soon as we go to complex foods, and imagine, I have been working once years ago at the vitamin in the vitamin industry. And to make a very simple vitamin C capsule, you will have, I think, 5 or 10 different ingredients. And of all these different ingredients that have their own different production chain, you have to know the LCA data and then combine them as a must in your products. So all those products, and also that Adam Dunovsky is shown a product of a plant-based drink with I don't know, I think 40 different ingredients to calculate a really good representative CO2 emission from that product is quite challenging. And that all happens not with really calculations of what we in the dairy industry can do, because we know exactly what happens from the grass until the yogurt or the cheese. We know everything with every step. The other LCA data are mostly based on documents. You have to calculate. So these come with a lot of uncertainties. So again, for staple foods, we do have reliable LCA data. And for non-staple foods and complex foods, these are mostly not available, and if available, with a very big, how do you say that, bias. It's like that. And of course, in the future, more and more LCA data will become available, I'm sure. And then we can get a more detailed view and also carry out better calculations with the models that I've been using.
Thanks. Hopefully that will happen soon. Wim, how are you doing?
I hope I'm back in the session.
Okay.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes, very clear.
Good, thank you very much.
So the first question is what I said based on the data from Stephan, but also from Adam Dunovsky. It is very complicated, all these figures, and if you do something else goes up, goes down. So it's hardly acceptable. So what is that means for the consumer at the end? Can we ever consumer in this way?
Yes, thank you for this question. Well, this links up with the slide that I showed of that crossroad with a lot of traffic signs as a kind of metaphor for a food product label, for example, that contains an overload of information. So there are a lot of labels and things to be mentioned, mandatory on food labels nowadays. And we see health logos, we see at the same time sustainability related logos, and that's making it quite complex for consumers to make up their mind and make a decision in line with their preferences. In many of those cases, people simply rely on easy decision rules. So they trust a brand, for example, or they trust a local product, and they simply assume that this product is healthy and at the same time, hopefully also sustainable, and that is guiding their choices. But I admit it's a very complex. It becomes a very complex story to tell to consumers, with also often contradictory information, because there are always studies that contradict another study, and there is also with the digital environment that we live in, a risk that many studies are simply discussed out of their context, and that messages easily spread. So it's often very confusing for consumers, and that's why they rely more and more on easy decision rules, which may then also explain the success of brands and easy, simple labels, preferably that encompass multiple issues. There was also a question in the chat related to the term. Should we refer to sustainable healthy diets, or healthy sustainable diets, or simply sustainable diets? Well, we see more and more indeed that both terms are used together, but still, especially in an academic and policy context. But I assume that also towards consumers, communication with consumers, this is going to become more mainstream. But difficult for people to understand all of this.
Chair, can I ask one small question to Wim Verbeke, please? Wim, you showed in your, because you have been asking people about plant-based diets, and what we see in our communication, and also we also of course try to follow consumers in the interpretation, and do you know what the interpretation of consumers is about, what their definition is about plant-based diets? And I'm going to tell you why. Because what we see is that when we look in the scientific literature, there are different, I think, more clear definitions of diets. A vegan diet is, we all know what a vegan diet is. No animal products and no animal components. A vegetarian, like the ovo-vegetarian, is a diet without meat. And a plant-based diet in the scientific literature is a diet mainly composing of fat, but of course still of plants, and mainly containing plants, but also containing some meat and dairy. And that's what we call a plant-based diet, because we compare plant-based diet to a current diet that we average consume. Now we are going to change it to the consumers and also to policymakers. They all interpret that plant-based diet, and that's what my experience is, towards a more extreme form, so towards more vegetarian or a vegan diet. While when dietitians and food scientists are talking about a plant-based diet, we define it as hopefully that the consumers consume sufficient, like 250 grams of vegetables and 200 grams of fruits. That's what we already call a plant-based diet. Can you tell something about consumer interpretation of these different definitions, and especially about the plant-based diet definition in the interpretation of consumers?
Well, in the study that I showed, we defined the term plant-based diet exactly as you also described it. So not as one of the more extreme versions, not as a vegan or a vegetarian diet, but a flexitarian diet, as it is more often also called. So in this study that I showed, plant-based was not excluding meat, or was not excluding livestock products and dairy products, but it contained, in some cases, for example, on a few days in a week, it contained no meat or no livestock products or alternatives. So it was,
I see, yes.
in this
But you
study,
are,
not one of the extremes.
no. But do you know, are you aware of, because if somebody knows the consumer or the citizen, which are, I think, two different entities, is you, how consumers interpret plant-based? If we are talking about plant-based, do you know that? How they perceive that term?
I'm not aware of studies that looked specifically at this. What is mostly done is that in those consumer studies, researchers, they define what they want their participants to understand as a plant-based diet. But I assume that indeed many different people have different opinions about what a plant-based diet is. But I have not seen
Maybe a
studies that
suggestion for a
measure that.
study for
Yep,
you. Maybe a suggestion for a
absolutely.
study. It's a very basic study because I think it's very important because
Yeah,
we are communicating also from our food authorities that make our food-based diet guidelines. Consume a plant-based diet with the risk that people are interpreting that as I should consume a vegan diet
yeah,
with all potential consequences. So I think also in communication, this would be, I think, a really good. It may be too simple to mention, but I think this is a really important study to see how people interpret these definitions.
yeah. I fully agree. Yes.
Okay, there was a question to Stephan Peters. Can you tell me the possibility of increasing protein, calcium, and other nutrients from solely plant-based? Maybe before you, Godwin also has a look to the presentation of Oliver Whithout. He shows very clearly the effect of different types of protein, animal, plant protein.
Okay, Wim, again, I think we can hardly understand you. I think there are some connection problems at your side, but I heard you mention sometimes proteins. So maybe the question is about whether in all these LCA data and applications, protein quality is taken into account. Is that your question?
Question was from Godwin. Maybe you have a look at the question and answer panel. He's nearly on the bottom.
Oh,
Uh,
let's have a look. Yeah.
you hear me again?
Mm.
What are the problems?
Or maybe the organizers can put this question into the chat for the presenters. Then we can answer this.
No, it's in the question and answer. Can you hear me again?
Yes, now I can hear you. So
From Godwin.
and now we can. Yeah.
You tell me the possibility of increasing the intake of protein, calcium, and other nutrients in a plant-based diet.
Okay. Yes, I see. We've Godwin. Hi, Godwin. Can you tell me the possibility of increasing the intake of protein, calcium, and other nutrients from a solely plant-based diet? I think that's a good question. I have to interpret this question because I think it can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. First, if you look at the current interpretations of the science when it comes to making a more sustainable diet, is that we are comparing different foods and foods based on the nutrients they contain and the absolute amount of nutrients. So let's take, for example, calcium. We all hear the different kind of stories. If I would take 1 glass of milk out of my diet, I have to compensate for example, by 400 grams of spinach to compensate for the calcium. So this is a way of compensating for individual nutrients in the diet. But there's one pitfall in these interpretations, and the same accounts for protein and other nutrients. And I do not know, Godwin, if you mean this, that we also have to take into account as soon as we eat, of course, you eat products like, for example, milk. It is digested, and subsequently the amino acids of this protein are digested and they become available in the bloodstream. So that's what we call the peripheral availability. So this has to be taken into account when we are trying to define foods as alternative for other foods. So if you take, for example, the calcium, what I told you, if we will consume spinach instead of milk to get the calcium, then we have to consume 400 grams of spinach. It's just an example. The figures, of course, a lot of dietitians among you, the figures will not be correct. But this is based on the nutrient content based in all those nutrient content database that you know of. But actually you have to go one step further because you also have to take into account the digestibility of these nutrients. And the uptake or the digestibility of calcium from plant-based foods is not 100%. So that means that I will compensate my milk for 400 grams by 400 grams of spinach. That might not be sufficient. Maybe I have to consume 500 or 600 grams of spinach to compensate for the inefficiency of the calcium digestion. And the same accounts for proteins. I think most of the food scientists and dietitians among you are more familiar with this. If we will take out, for example, meat of our diet and compensate for meat by plant-based proteins, we have two issues which we are confronted with, actually three. One, the content, so the concentration of protein in plants is relatively lower than in the beef. So you have to consume a higher amount of plants. There's another issue in plant protein. There are some essential amino acids limiting in plant-based foods. So to compensate for 100 grams of beef, I even have to consume more plant products to compensate for that essential amino acids. But then there's another issue that most plant-based proteins are not digested as efficiently as animal proteins. So that means there's even one step more, that I even have to increase the intake of the amount of consumption of the plant proteins based on the digestibility. So this is what makes things more complex. And in the current dietary guidelines that are taking into account decreasing animal products and try to compensate for by plant-based products and also those plant-based alternatives, they calculate only based on the nutrient content to compensate for, but not on the essential amino acid composition of plant-based proteins, and also not corrected for the digestibility of these nutrients. So even if replacing one-on-one animal products by plant-based products, this is not correct, and we have we need much more data to see if we can do that from a nutrient point of view in a more correct way. So it was a really long answer, but I see Professor Sarah, you're back.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
See whether it's going better. In fact, you also answered the question from Deborah Odudu, because he was asked, are complementary plant food the same animal source in terms of bioavailability? That is not.
No, that's true, and still we got a sound problem, Professor Sarah. So, but
maybe,
exactly.
Maybe Francis will take over because.
Hello everybody. Hi Wim, hi Stephan. So I'm stepping in actually because Wim Saris seems to have some connection issues. So for the coming minutes that we still have the Q&As, I will take over. I saw also a really interesting question coming in about sustainability and sustainable diets in comparison with like malnutrition. Because I think we talked a lot about sustainability also from a more European maybe perspective. So maybe both Wim and Stephan, can you shine some light on this? How we can see this in countries where they are really facing malnourishing children or malnourished problems.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I'm addressing myself to the person who asked the question, and this observation is absolutely right. And I believe that one of the comments was also that for me, a sustainable diet is an affordable diet and an available diet. And that's of course also true, because this was one of the messages in my talk, that sustainability has many different facets and can mean many different things to people. And for consumers, it often means that trade-offs have to be made. In one of the slides, one of the study results I showed, and this was the context of animal welfare, but that this product, which is then more sustainable because of being more animal friendly, that people believe that it would be more expensive. That means less affordable, and they also believed that they would have to do more effort to find that product, so less available. And the same may also go with nutritional value. If higher nutritional value or better healthiness value of a product, that may also mean a trade-off with affordability, availability. That's a very difficult challenge indeed. And we have not even spoken about a fair income for farmers and producers, for example, because that's also part of the concept of sustainability, which is also not taken for granted. So there are indeed trade-offs that consumers have to make, and yeah, in my opinion, that they have to make too often and in too many cases. So the challenge is effectively to avoid that consumers have to make too many of those trade-offs, so that they can afford and easily find healthy, sustainable diets, not only in a Western context, but especially also in other areas of the world. Yeah.
Yes, and maybe to add on that, Francis, I totally agree with Professor Verbeke. And I know that there are a lot of people from a lot of different countries in the world. And my presentation also has got another paradigm, and that's a bit the Western society arrogant paradigm, is that we have to consume less and less animal-based diet. That accounts for us in the Western societies. But if we go to other parts in the world, and if we look at the nutrient intake of consumers in other parts of the world, let's take Africa, let's take a large part of Asia, there are a lot of people, take in India, that are nutrient deficient. And we cannot go to them and tell them you have to, because we believe that beef and milk have got a higher carbon footprint, you should consume less animal products. That's totally nonsense, of course. And I think with an ecological food transition, we forget with, well, let me say the Western arrogance that health should be safeguarded in any food transition, as is the economical issues, as is the cultural, as are the cultural issues. But and also the Eat Lancet Commission that said, okay, we have to eat less animal-based products and 250 grams of dairy. Even they said, and they were very extreme in decreasing animal-based products. Even they said this should be filled in a local context. And that means that in the Western society, where we eat too much of almost everything, we have to consume less, and to decrease the CO2 footprint, less animal products. But in India and in African countries where the people are nutrient deficient or are at risk of nutrient deficiencies, they should even increase the intake. That's the advice: increase the intake of animal-based foods. And this is, I think, something that we should be really aware of. And finally, when we are talking about, and also Professor Verbeke said that, and maybe this should be the main message for people to realize after this session, is a sustainable diet is not only an ecological friendly diet, it's ecology, it's health and nutrition, it should be economically friendly, and it should be culturally acceptable. And this is only at a diet level, because we are not only talking about at that FAO definition of a sustainable diet, but about a sustainable food system. So also the transition of the food system has got 3 levels. One is the diet, one is the producer level, and one is the farmer level. And all these 4 dimensions, they also apply on those other 2 levels. So if you are going towards a more ecological friendly, sustainable food production system, we have to take care of that. It should be ecologically more friendly. It should be healthy for the producers, for the farmers. It should be economically good for those farmers. They should not lose their money, because a lot of farmers, they are poor. And it should be culturally acceptable for those farmers, and also on producer level. So it's very complex. So what I would like to say to the viewers today, thinking about food transitions is not, when it comes from an ecological point of view, it's not only ecology. Health should be safeguarded. is the economical aspects and the cultural aspects. And if these are in balance, so they should not one aspect should be optimized, but these should be imbalanced. And when they are in balance, then the food transition has got the biggest chance of success.
Oh, thanks. I think that were really interesting points both you, Wim, and Stephan made, and I think that's a really nice ending of this Q&A session.